morning from my side. Well, I'm going to speak about women's football. Not the usual women's football, but the big women's football, which is the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup. We had the World Cup in 2011 in Germany. It was an excellent opportunity to do a survey on the event visitors. And as you see, the Women's World Cup doesn't have a large history, and it used to be hosted in large countries like the US, where women's football has a different status actually than in Europe and South America, Africa, and so on. On the other hand, the World Cup in Germany was the first one with a real ticketing. So tickets were not just giving away for free and so on. And now, 2015 in Canada, at the last Women's World Cup, again, attendance figures were pushed, and there is kind of a debate on whether the data on attendance figures is reliable, and it's about the same as in Germany. But don't compare women's football to men's football. It's simply not fair. But don't compare basketball, European ice hockey, European team handball. Don't compare this to men's football, because men's football is here in economic terms, and all the other sports are down there. So women's football is quite doing well on this lower level. And therefore, we need the let's say second or third league cities for the World Cup with the smaller stadiums. Berlin, of course, was an exemption because this was the opening match, Germany against the US team, and so this was really drawing the crowds. This was sold out. This was a world record in women's football attendance. But apart from that, I don't know whether you know the city of Sinsheim. It doesn't matter, you know. It's a small city, but an excellent museum and a nice stadium. Technical museum. I think even the Concorde is there, so it's worthwhile to go there. But apart from that, forget about it. So but at the men's World Cup, that was different. So that were the big cities. Anyhow, we had the opportunity to do a large survey, and actually we ended up with the largest survey ever of a large sports event. And so we even had a sample which was larger than at the men's World Cup, which we surveyed as well with a developed and tested multi-purpose questionnaire. And this sample is now very interesting for us for a whole diversity of issues and research interests. Now, what is the specific topic I'm talking about today? It's about the so-called event leveraging. The idea is that you have development goals. We heard about development index, where Germany is on the top, the football world champion, so you need a development plan, and then you have the event, and you link this together. And this generates a trigger, a leveraging effect, so that you leverage synergies between the event and your long-term development planning. So that is the idea of event leveraging. But there is not so much, it's quite compelling, the approach and the idea, and it's really, there's a growth of literature on event leveraging. but not so much with rigorous empirical research. And this is the problem. And so there's no strong proof for the functioning, for the efficiency of this leveraging approach. A strong conceptual appeal, but a lack of empirical testing. And that is what we want to do, and we start with the stimulus of the stimulus organism response model. So we just look at whether there is an inspiration, there is a push for people when they go to the event, whether they feel inspired to change their behavior after the event. So whether the preferences for women's football is strengthened by attending the event. That is the idea, and here in this research today, the focus is on watching TV afterwards, and this is different from much of the sports economics demand research, which is more aggregate and on the macro level, and we are here on the individual level, and we are focusing on a small team sport and not on men's football. So this is operationalized in one key question, simply asking, due to the Women's World Cup, I will in the future watch more women's football on TV. This is our key variable, and then we have a variety of interesting other variables on preferences, on socioeconomic background, and so on, to ask to analyze the question stated here: will they really watch more women's football? Will they feel inspired? Just here, technical issue. The histograms are nicely shaped here for our variable. The other variables on future consumption of women's football are much more complicated in terms or in technical terms. So here we are on the safe side to perform regression analysis. This is just for the statisticians among you. Okay, here you see nothing, but you see the model on the left-hand side, which shows you, well, we want to explain the variable more TV. So will the people feel inspired to watch more women's football on TV after having assisted the event? And then we have a binary variable on that variable as well to test whether the model is rigorous. And then we have a couple of variables on football preferences, on preferences towards the event, and socio-demographic variables as well, and fixed effects of the regional dispersion of the event locations and so on. And here in the red and orange rectangles, you just see you still have the usual hierarchy of preferences for football. It's the men's league, it's the national league before the international competitions, because there you have more identification with the teams. It's still the men's leagues, also for women football fans. And then it's the event. This is different. This is big women's football. But the National League, the Women's National League, is not so highly regarded. And that is the key problem. How to create the interest for the National Women's League, because this is the bread and butter business during the year. This is not the once-in-a-lifetime event like the FIFA Women's World Cup. So here on the left-hand side, we have the binary models. On the right-hand side, we have the full models. The best and the full model is the last column, and the others are rather for testing the sensitivity of the models. Having tickets is an important factor to explain the interest in watching more women's football on TV after the event. So exposure and revealed preference, so I'm really buying the ticket, this is a clear statement for, okay, I'm interested in the event. So we are controlling for that. But other things being equal, then we see that a lot of key variables on the preferences towards the Women's World Cup are highly significant. Here, for instance, I have a favorite team. I find the match attractive. I want to watch as many matches at the World Cup as possible. And the general interest, I would have watched it if it had taken place in a different country. So all this are important explaining variables here. So a certain preference has already to be there. Otherwise, it's difficult to have this interest also after the event. Onlooker are just passers-by, so they weren't particularly interested. So therefore, the effect is negative. And then it becomes more and more interesting. The interest in international football isn't important, but it's the men's league, which is quite important to explain the interest in watching women's football on TV. And then, of course, whether I like the women's league and whether I even prefer women's football above men's football. This is, of course, by far the strongest. But those target groups are not so interesting for us for developing marketing strategies, because they are already there. They are already key fans, hardcore fans of women's football. I don't have to convince them. But those who prefer men's football, I have to convince them to come over to watch the women's matches. So, but then playing football doesn't play a part, because it's about, couch potato consumption. It's about sitting in your living room watching TV. It's quite different than playing football. Look at the men's football fans. They are smoking, drinking, and have such a stomach. This is the typical football fan. I'm smoking myself. I'm a football fan. But so it's not so much about playing. It's about fandom, about fan culture. So, and here it's not so about playing. And also, this time we find that gender is important, but not so strong as many officials believe. 0.049 is not a strong regressor here. So, but however, when it comes to watching TV, women's football, then women tend to be more interested. Always other things being equal. All these effects are really the single effect of this characteristic that we ask in the question here. And interestingly, the older you are, the more interested you are in watching. And this has also a lot to do with typical TV consumption. And also the cliche about TV viewership, the less you are educated, the more you tend to watch TV, and we find this here in the questionnaire as well. Very interesting and a nice indication for an inspirational effect is that those Germans who were interviewed at a German match, they are less interested in watching women's football on TV later on. Why? Because they were deceived. Because the German team didn't perform as we expected it to perform. It's maybe the strongest national team, not only in women's football, maybe beyond that, maybe stronger than the All Blacks in rugby, because they win nearly every World Championship and European Championship. So really strong team, and in their own country they failed and didn't perform as strongly. So people were deceived, and then, you know, the impulse, the inspirational effect is, of course, lower. So we see indications for this inspirational effect in the positive and in the negative. So my final slide and conclusion. Well, if you are a die-hard men's football fan, and you love really the fighting style, football style on the pitch, and you love the tough male audience in the curves in the stadium and so on, we cannot convince you to watch women's football because you love the men's game. So there need to be a certain preference given that you are open for women's football. Otherwise, this stimulus, this signal by the event won't be effective. So it's more a reviving effect. So there is something, you are open to it, and then you get interested, and then you get the push, you know? And there, interestingly, we see there is a transmission of men's football interest towards women's football interest. It's possible. Also very interesting, in Germany, the stadium attendance, you have two distinctive groups. You have the young girls and the old men. Why do they go to the stadium? Not to watch girls in short trousers. No, it's the style of play. It's the old style of play, like in the 70s, 80s, and so on. It's slower. It's not so aggressive. It's not so crazy. It's not so tabloid like the first leagues in men's football. You know, it's not so over-commercialized. It's more familiar and so on. And also my parents love to watch women's football on TV when it's on TV. The older people love it. It's nice to follow, you know. But they won't go on the TV to see the league's games on TV. That's the problem. However, after the World Cup 2011, now one match per match day is televised on Eurosport, so in a niche channel, and they have a viewership of 150,000 viewers, which is larger than the matches in ice hockey and basketball. So women's football is doing quite well, and Eurosport is really satisfied and happy with televising women's football. So there's something going on, but of course on a very low level. But it's the same level like in ice hockey and basketball. So it's moving. Okay, but what we analyzed here, of course, it's just the stimulus. We have to continue research on the whole transmission, what's going on from stimulus to organism and the real response. We don't have the link yet, but also in marketing research, there's not the perfect model there to analyze this. So it's an open question, and we have to continue to work on that. And all this field of inspirational effects on sport participation, on TV viewing, like here and so on. It's in its infancy, and it's just starting those studies like these. Thank you very much.